The number one rule for reading academic criticism. So, academic criticism is the other perspective that you're going to be critiquing in this piece. Now, it can be pretty overwhelming to dig into this kind of criticism because often a lot of teachers will present you with criticism that's written at a tertiary level. So, not even really for undergrads, but postgrads and beyond. So, the number one rule is to take your time. Slow and steady really wins the race. One of the worst mistakes you can make is rushing in, make an assumption about what they're talking about, and then writing it as if it's true when it's actually not. They're not BuzzFeed articles. They're not meant to be read in 5 minutes. Even if you want it to be so, even if you would love if you could read it in 5 minutes, that's not really the way that they are structured. So my recommendation, if you have the luxury of a fair bit of time, is to read it all the way through once and kind of get a broad overview or broad idea about what it might be talking about. As you go through, highlight any words or phrases that you don't understand and go to people with help unpacking and unpicking these. So Google can definitely be of help, but your teacher and your peers are going to be your key resources for this one. Once you have a decent understanding of the criticism as a whole, it's really important to identify what the author's what the critic's thesis is. So this is the most important part of your essays. The thesis is the most important part of your essays. This should also be true for the critics as well. If you can't find it easily, it might not be in the intro in the same sort of clear, straightforward way that yours is. It's probably going to be repeated in various forms throughout the piece. So what's the argument, idea, or theme that's repeated most throughout the criticism? That's generally the argument or thesis of the critic. So identify that first. And it's also important once you've identified that thesis to decide whether or not you agree with it. Do you think that they have an accurate understanding on what the author has done, what the author has chosen, or does it differ from your understanding of the novel or text? And do you have your own understanding of it? Mark their arguments throughout, so mark the different points and pieces of evidence that they use, and each time decide whether or not you agree. At all of these points, you can decide, is there another piece of evidence in the text that you think could be stronger for this, or do you think there's a piece of evidence in the text that refutes that claim? Whether or not you agree with it, their logic can be used to your advantage, in the same way that the perspective of your friend sitting next to you in class can be used to your advantage, even if you don't specifically agree with it. If you annotate more, if you decide that you want to annotate more beyond those things that I've just outlined, also a good idea to keep track of the key themes from the text that being discussed in the criticism. That gives you a pretty good idea about what the critic thinks is important in terms of thematic value in the text. So if they talk loads about grief, then it's probably a good idea that grief is a really central theme for the text. This seems like pretty basic stuff, but it's really good to just get a deeper understanding of a text based on the other work that people have done. Let them do the hard legwork for you, and you can really benefit off their understanding and off the work that they have done. Now, does the critic take a stance with or against the author? That's another really important question. So typically in any piece of writing, the author of the original piece will have some sort of message or moral that they want the audience to think, feel, or understand by the end. Now, the critic may or may not agree with that perspective or representation that the original author has offered. A lot of the time, the kind of texts that you guys will be reading in literature were written a fair while in the past, and they typically have a bit of a political or social take that they want to be offering to the broader population. So figure out whether or not the critic agrees with the original author, and then does that critic's opinion on that particular matter align or disalign with your own?